Okay, so good evening, everybody, and welcome to the webinar this evening, which is on how to decide when to lower inputs. So I'm Chris Leslie from AHDB up in Scotland. So I'm responsible for the strategic farm, which we've just announced as Balbirnie Home Farms in Fife. And we're unfortunately postponed the kick-off meeting from that back into January, but we're very much looking forward to working with everybody at Balbirnie. So if we just start off, if we move on to a little bit of housekeeping, everybody is on mute throughout the webinar. Unfortunately, this platform, that is kind of how it works. So the interaction, I can urge you, is on this side, and you'll see the functions down the right-hand side of the screen if it's on the right. So from the top down, you'll see there's polls, there's handouts, and there's also the chat and question functionality. So if you do have a question, please feel free to ask the question. The handouts are there, which go alongside this presentation. Feel free to have a look at them, and also the links back to HDB website to Strategic Farm. So the other things that we're going to questions, as we say, please ask them as you go, and I'll do my best to try and get a bit of discussion going. The panelists that we have this evening that we'll introduce in a minute, they're going to do the same just by means of putting the camera on. We do have a fairly tight schedule tonight. We're going to run till about 8:30. We're going to try and stick to time as best we can, but it depends on the questions and interaction we get. We are recording this session, so it can go onto YouTube after. So we will be holding to what we say. So no escaping that way at all, guys. No pressure on the rest of the speakers either on such a topic. You'll see us Twitter, AHDB Serials. There's been quite a bit of activity today and a few problems in logging on. I do apologise for that. We did try and put out a few tweets to try and make it as easy as possible. And this webinar is obviously part of the wider series and the Strategic Farm Week. So we've got quite a fun-filled week. This is the end of day 2, and tomorrow we do have quite a bit more going on as well, which we'll explain a little bit later on. So if we move on, so we do have basis and in-roso points. Now, in-roso points, we're not quite sure how that's going to work, but please do put your number in anyway, and we will submit them to in-roso. Basis points, I think they did say that you could just put your number and name in, and then we'll record that and submit that to basis as well. So if you put that into the chat or question side just with your name and your basis number, I've obviously been given quite a few of them already today. There's 2 points per session, and we do have 6 sessions available, so there's 12 points in total, which is obviously quite good. Okay, so the format, so David is going to give us a little introduction about Balbirnie, just to introduce the farm and what they do and sort of what we're looking to work together on. Then we've got Simon Cowell and Tim Barton, who are pretty well down the route of regenerative agriculture. So we're going to have a few slides from them and pictures and a bit of a chat about their experience. Then we've got Brian Barker, who's from Strategic Cereal Farm East, and he's been doing a bit of this work, trialling it on his farm, so he's going to ground truth his research to date and where the project's been to. And then we've got our very own Catherine Harries, who's going to help us along with some of AHDB's tools and how they can be manipulated to show you the benefits of a reduced input system. Okay, so the objective of this system, we really want to have an in-depth look at the crop performance and see if yield really is king and at what cost. So this has been a bit of a running theme with us on our farm bench activities up in Scotland. So most of you guys that are in the 95 attendees so far will be aware of that. So if you have a little think, what would you like to know by the end of the session? And then keep it coming in the question box. So we'll move on just now to David, and he'll take us through the strategic farm in Scotland. Okay, David?
Hello, good evening, everybody. My name's David Agline, and I'm Farms Manager at Balbirnie Home Farms here in Fife, up in what was sunny Scotland. We do have some rain now, which is quite nice. A brief introduction to what we are at Balbirnie. We are an in-hand farming operation of Balbirnie Home Farms, and we extend to about 1,150 hectares, give or take. You can see on the slide there, you can see our enterprises as they stand this year. I might add, like most people in the UK, that this is not a typical year. We have currently half the wheat area that we normally have. Oats we managed to squeak in, but mostly with spring oats making up the acreage where winter oats weren't possible. We opted for a lot of spring beans this year as a break crop, given that the margins on spring barley didn't look that great early in the year. So we thought, well, why not put break crops in, take the benefit. We still ended up with a lot of spring barley, which is probably 50% more than we normally do. You'll also note that we've a 170 suckler cows livestock enterprise, which we try to finish as many of the progeny as we can. And for that, we grew approximately 50 hectares of kale and forage crops. On top of this, we have about 170 hectares of brassicas, vegetables, carrots, and potatoes. And the remaining area, approximately 300 hectares, is grass of varying qualities and types, mostly on ground that's not particularly suited for varying reasons to arable production. Where we are in terms of crop establishment here at Balbirnie, we're trying to direct drill. We've been working away at this for 4 or 5 years now with varying degrees of success, and might I add, some failure too. And we are wanting to expand this opportunity in the future. So if Emily wants to move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a brief rundown of what we're looking to investigate as a starting point for our strategic farm project here, the 6 years that we will have the project here. I've mentioned how we've had some failures with direct drilling. We really want to expand the opportunities to successfully direct drill up here. The springtime seems the hardest opportunity for us to succeed at, really generally due, we find, to the soil taking longer to warm up in the spring. And we find through experience that our crops to gain maximum yield and output need to be in the ground as early as is possible. And cold soils don't necessarily facilitate this. Although we might hear in Brian's talk later on in this session that perhaps chasing the highest yield is not the most sensible route to carry on. We do manage to establish quite a large acreage of cover crops here in the autumn, mostly rye based at the minute. We are struggling to find species that successfully establish late on in the season up here, and rye is one of the few that is reliable, and we can use it to graze livestock on to help in that respect. We also want to try and integrate more livestock into our arable rotation. Like many arable farms around the country, our farm has become quite polarized here in that we have a large area of arable cropping and an area of grass, and the two are separate. There are fences around the grass fields and not many fences around the arable fields. So we're trying to pull the two together a bit more, try and build some fertility onto our arable land, as well as reducing the cost of our livestock production system as well, and trying to improve the fertility of our soils. So essentially, to sum up, we are aiming over the next 6 years to build a more resilient production system. We are firmly moving along the lines of regenerative farming, and that is going to be the kind of core theme running through our strategic farm project here. And we're open to any suggestions for ideas that people think we ought to try, or solutions to problems that we have solutions to problems that we have here that others have found it elsewhere, would be very helpful. So get sending in the ideas, please. We're all ears. And that's that'll do for me. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much, David. Now, just for those that have really just logged in, as we were saying earlier, if you look at that side of the screen, sorry, in the questions panel, if you do have a basis or and ROSO number, please do put it in the questions, and we'll pick that up and submit them for you. So, obviously, this is quite an interesting topic, which most of you that know me, this is kind of one of the things we're into, and you know, the dark arts, as we call it, and the bricks meters, and trying to find other ways to get to the same point that may be cheaper, may not be, but you know, at the end of the day, do you still have to reach for the can? Yes, no, the jury's out. So what we want to know, a quick poll, which Christian's going to launch, and now you'll see the polls tab. This should make the screen, there we are, change just like that. Now you do just click the screen. So how much fungicide, what have you applied to date? Have we done a full program? T1 and T2 only, nutrition only, or have we had a sprayer malfunction and we've done absolutely nothing and it's been the best year ever? We are, what's the rain gauge saying? We are at 0.9 of a millimetre of rain so far in Scotland, and we've got a running bet on with quite a few of our business groups as to how much we're going to get. But as we say, feel free to put a vote in there just now to see where we are, because it's going to be interesting for our panelists to know just exactly where everybody's at. Okay, so we see that, yeah, there is quite a few interesting ones coming out of this, I think, actually. So we've got 107 attendees in this tonight. Hopefully everybody's enjoying their supper. Kids to bed, which mine are just about to. And Christian will just end that just now and put the results up. There we go. So that was not exactly what I was expecting. I thought there'd be a lot more people on a full programme. Certainly in Scotland here, we're probably on a full programme up until this point. It's pretty hard to back off that with only T2s and T3s left to go. So we'll move to the next question here as well, Christian. Oh, Fiona needs to go forward one. There we go. So next question for the poll, have you applied any foliar nutrition to date? So very simply, yes or no. I think from our yen group and from our results that have come in from that, I think most people are tending to try and give it a go. We certainly see a few of the statistics that maybe aren't statistically significant, but they seem to make a difference in on-farm trials. So there we are. Right, Christian, if you want to end that one there, I think that's quite a quick one. So there we are, 78% of people are trying foliar nutrition. Okay, so now for the last bit, with that nutrition and our crop protection in, where do we think the current crop potential is going for winter wheat in particular this year? Difficult one to say. Poll is now open, so cast your vote. This isn't quite who wants to be a millionaire, so there is no prize at the end of this. There might be a bit more cash left in the pot, but this was certainly a hot topic in our benchmarking groups at the start of the season as to just what was the yield going to be. And I think back then with the wet, we couldn't quite write on the highest, the greater than 10 tonne a hectare, whereas now I think we're, you know, it's dwindled even further, but an interesting one. Okay, so we want to end that one there, Christian, and see where we are. There we go. So people thinking we're going to be in the 7 to 10 tonne a hectare range, which is very interesting. It's what you'd expect from an average season, I would say. And as usual, we're just discussing it, healthier plants, the higher yield end. If you've got better yield, you get healthier plants. You tend to not need as much fungicide, but the weaker plants that tend to take the disease are always more difficult to predict and need the fungicide applied. So we're going to discuss a bit more about this. So now we shall hand over to Simon up first, and we'll start off with Simon. So as I say, if there are any questions, please do enter them in the question box down there, and we'll try and get a bit of a discussion going. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Good evening, everybody. Right, well, I'll launch straight into my slides if we can. Right, this is just to show you the photograph on the left is the soil I'm dealing with. This was 15 years ago. And my natural state of my soil is just a few inches or 2 or 3 inches of topsoil over pure clay. After sort of several decades of ploughing and subsoiling and heavy cultivations, really the topsoil had disappeared. There wasn't any left. And you can see from this photograph in 205 that it's clay, pure clay right to the surface. That made it very difficult for getting a seedbed and establishing crops. And I really realised I've got to do something different. So went over to a full no-till system, and you can see, well, this is 12 years later, I've actually made about 4 inches of topsoil over the top of the clay. That's not organic matter additions, that's actually a biological system that's created the topsoil. And the only way that could have happened was with no disturbance at all. That's a completely natural biological process. But I like this photograph because you can see even deeper in the profile little bits of darker material and crumb structure quite a long way down in the soil profile. Worms take stuff down and the roots go down here and break down aerobically. And obviously this layer is going to get deeper and deeper as we go on. Okay, the next slide, please. Now my sort of principles for the way I farm is that I feel everything that we do as farmers conventionally is going to have an effect on the soil biology. We're killing things and unbalancing the natural system with cultivations, with fertilizers, with herbicides and fungicides. Just about everything we do is going to have an effect on the biology. And so my idea is to try and reduce those effects. And so the first way obviously is to stop all cultivations, but then the next way is to try and use what I call low input crops. So this means that they're having less impact on the soil biology. I mean, a simple example of that would be stopping growing oilseed rape and growing linseed instead, because there's much less nitrogen and herbicides and everything. There's linseed, and it only needs about a third of the nitrogen. And the other way I've tried to work is to introduce some perennial crops. So there's even less impact on the biology. Just hang on there, yeah. I'm lucky enough to have a Dengie crop dryers nearby, a farmer-owned company that make horse feeds, and I grow linseed, lucerne for them. That's in the ground for 3 years. Brilliant crop for the soil structure, and works really well. And I also grow ryegrass for seed, which is in for 2 years. Both these crops are very minimal inputs. The lucerne has perhaps just one herbicide a year, and it's there for 3 years. The ryegrass, yes, it has a bit of nitrogen, but some years that's all it does have. Some herbicides used sometimes. So it's just trying to find ways to farm with less impact is basically the principle. And by growing these different crops and introducing beans and things, spring crops, spring barley, spring wheat, using much less nitrogen, I've actually halved the amount of nitrogen I buy from the old days when we were just growing wheat and rape. Just giving the soil biology a much better chance to thrive. Now, I also try with these perennial crops to overlap them with the preceding crop and the following crop if I can. The idea is that, like this grass picture here, it's building up a mycorrhizal network underground for 2.5 years from while it's growing, and then I direct drill the winter beans into the grass, I hadn't sprayed the grass off at that point. So the beans can start growing, and there's about a month before they come through, and then spray the grass off just before they come. But the point is that the mycorrhizae that have been living on the grass for 2 years can attach to the bean roots and transfer. So the beans have immediately got access to all that brilliant sort of nutrient supplying system underground. And it's a similar thing with the lucerne. Although I spray the lucerne off to put wheat in after 3 years, the glyphosate doesn't really kill the lucerne. It knocks the top back, but the roots are still alive underground. It's a very high mycorrhizal plant, a huge network of fungi, and because of the minimal inputs that's had, the whole soil biology's had a chance to recover, and it's still there ready for when the next wheat crop gets going. Okay, next slide, please. This is just another example. I've got a stripper header. I harvest the linseed and then direct drill straight in with a disc drill. This is a really good part of the system. I always get the highest yields of wheat after linseed doing this. And here again, although we desiccate the top of the linseed to harvest, the roots are not killed at that point. They're still living underground, and the transfer of the mycorrhizae onto the wheat happens as it starts growing.
Simon, just at that point, we're just wondering there. So linseed obviously came about in the rotation. You know, one of the things, does the tail start wagging the dog, or where did the linseed thing come from? Is that something that you had to do, or that you wanted to do, or there's a market locally to you for, or you know, I mean, it's obviously fantastic.
It's no good treating each crop individually. It has just a brilliant part of the rotation. It's fantastic for the soil structure. It just opens it up. I use linseed as a sort of, if I've got a field that's gone a bit wrong and a bit anaerobic, linseed just turns it around. It will resurrect a problem for me. It's great to have it in there every few years. I don't look at the margins of these crops. It's a whole rotation length that I'm considering, and it's better not to think about each one individually anyway.
Yeah, so you need a bit of a mindset shift to say, well, you know, you can reduce your inputs, but actually it's more of a holistic integrated system that, you know, until you're around the whole rotation, that's the bit that needs to change.
Yeah, it is. It's a longer term thinking altogether. Yeah, and you know, every farm's different. We're all set up differently. I know some farmers that are paying, you know, high rents and have got big mortgage or whatever. I can understand it is difficult for people. Everyone's got to think of their own way around it, really.
Yeah, and you harvest the linseed just conventionally, combine. Is there anything fancy behind that side of it, or
with a stripper header on the front?
Yeah.
So I don't cut the linseed. I just rip the seed off the top and leave it. Okay. You can see in the second photograph the linseed's all still standing there, and it can go through the winter. The neighbours think I haven't drilled it for quite a few months.
Well, at least you've got two chances, haven't you? That's if it doesn't work, you can always go again.
Yeah. The idea is that it's human nature to try to keep doing things and trying to influence what you're doing, but really, it's what you don't do that makes the difference. And it's quite difficult to back off and say, you know, I'm not going to spray this with a fungicide. I'm not going to put any phosphate or phosphate fertilizer on. You've got to give nature a chance to work. It's quite a different way of thinking.
If you had the linseed there, so say for instance your wheat crop after that you take to harvest, is the linseed all degraded by that point, or do you have to harvest?
It'll be gone by the end of the winter, really, yeah.
And do you use the stripper header on the wheat as well, so you don't take the linseed or the...
No, I use the stripper header on barley, oats, and my grass seed, of course.
And then you would just conventionally cut the wheat at that point.
Yeah. I mostly chop the wheat straw. Last year we had some really big crops of wheat, huge amount of straw, and I could see that was going to be a problem for me for the next crop. So some of my best fields I had them baled, but that's not a problem. I'm not worried about doing that.
No, absolutely. No, thank you. Good.
Yeah, okay, we'll have the next slide. I was just going to say a little bit about sort of inoculants and biostimulants. In my opinion, if your soil's not in good condition, putting on an inoculant is going to be a waste of time, really. That if the conditions are wrong, they'll just die out within a week or two. But on the other hand, if you've got your soil in a really good condition, everything's really aerobic and there's lots of organic matter and things, the biology is going to be there anyway. It will have multiplied and grown and be working. So then the inoculants will be a waste of time. But really, it's just something you've got to be patient with by backing off the things that interfere and damage your biology. But what I have found is that you can speed the process up by using some really good compost. And I make a bit of compost of my own every year, and I'd like to do a lot more, but it's a matter of finding the materials to do it with. But it's a bit of an art breeding up the really good stuff that you want to inoculate your soil with. And I only put these on at very low rates as an inoculation, but the difference with doing it with compost is that you're supplying the microbes with a home they're happy to live in the compost. And so even on a really degraded, poor soil, putting compost on would make a difference. And I mean, I've seen fantastic results with it.
And when you're doing that, Simon, are you tailoring any of the compost to specific nutrition deficiencies that you see in the field, or are you sort of making one generic, if you like, that goes around it?
No, I'm not thinking about nutrition at all with this. This is providing the really good microbes, the protozoa and all the things to get them going in the soil, and that it's them that provide the nutrition. In the photograph, the first one, that clay is chock full of nutrients, but they're not available to the plants at all. And it's only by getting the biology working that will release it, solubilize the clay and release nutrients which get into cycle into the organic matter in the soil, and then plants can take it up.
And do you move, when you're doing this specific site, do you take everything to the site you're going to spread on, or do you have a sort of composting area that you work from?
I usually do it in the field where I'm going to spread it. To get around the regulations, I just treat it as a muck heap where it's going to be spread. I mean, I could talk all day about compost making. It's quite a complicated thing, a bit of a dark art, really, but yeah, when it works right.
It's the way it's got to go, though, hasn't it? I mean, you know, we've got so many great organic manures that we should be taking advantage of them and just making best use of them. So, yeah. Oh, David?
Yeah.
Composting is very interesting, Simon. Something that we've been tinkering with up here, and indeed intend to kind of improve on that. But you say it's a bit of a dark art, but from what I've understood, there's quite a lot of temperature. It's very temperature dependent to get the right product or performance for your compost. Do you worry about that, or you just kind of wing it and it works out all right in the end?
Yeah, no, I monitor temperature. you know, all the time, every day. You need to keep it under 70 degrees, 65 really. If it goes above, you start to breed a completely different set of microbes that are like living in hot temperatures, and no use when they're spread out on the field. So the way to stop it getting too hot is to turn it again. And if you get the mix right with the right carbon and nitrogen ratio and the right moisture content, that means turning it every day. It heats up really quickly, and probably 4 or 5 days running, it will get a turn to keep the temperature down. And then I'll leave it a day every other day, and then 3 days in a week. Probably gets turned 7 or 8 times.
And do you see a big decrease in the actual physical volume when you're composting like that? You know, so if you go through and turn it once, obviously, you know, we're seeing the picture of the machine there, but does that then change, or do you have to sort of push it up a bit or add stuff to it as you go?
No, I start off with a line as big as I can get through the machine, and it reduces by about a third over the process. You're losing a bit of carbon dioxide because everything that's living in there is anaerobic, and they're breathing oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide like we do. So you're going to lose some of it, but everything, once it's finished, that carbon is stable organic matter in the compost, and that, you know, that when it's spread out, that'll be unlike you can spread manure and lose nearly all your carbon if you get it wrong.
And do you analyze it then to sort of determine your application rate as to what you're going to put, or do you have parts that, you know, it's kind of hard to say. Up here we have quite a few sort of, you know, there's not really a flat field, is there? So, you know, we would have our nows, as we call them, never grow anything. So I would probably blanket, you know, probably forklift bucket deep over the tops of them, to try and regenerate them a little bit more, if you like. And in the bottom, obviously, where everything's run down to over the centuries, is fine. But is that the sort of thing you do, or how do you determine application?
I just make a line, a windrow in a field, and I have a contractor come and spread it, and I say, here's the heap, and this is the side of the field. Cover the whole field with what I've got, and it doesn't matter really. I'm not applying nutrients. I'm not trying to build organic matter. I'm just inoculating the soil with that. Who knows what the correct rate is? And you know, I try and work on about 4 tons an acre, 10 tons a hectare. Sometimes less, sometimes more. I mean, that's it's just a light dusting of the ground, really.
Yeah.
Certainly make the dung go a lot further.
Oh, definitely, yes. Yeah, I mean, there's no livestock around here. All I've got to go on is a few horses in livery yards and things, a bit of muck like that to make it with. So I can't get anywhere near enough that I'd like, but I just do a little bit every year and put it on a field that I think needs a bit of help.
And there's the specifics of the machine involved. I know Harry's there, which we can definitely go to for more details, but is that something that you've bought yourself, or is that in a sort of group of you, or is it very much, you know, I mean, I suppose we're getting to the stage as well up here where you know you need to do it, and well, David's got one, but you know, it's just having the time to do it. So it's just, is it your machine, or how have you gone about that sort of scenario?
Yeah, it's quite difficult. I bought this machine about 10 years ago, second hand. It wasn't being used, and I was just lucky to find it. Everyone wants to get into composting nowadays, and there aren't the machines around to buy second hand, and they're quite expensive bit of kit, new, just to use for a few hours here and there. You know, it's difficult to do, but they do so much better job than trying to turn it with a 360 digger or a loader. You can be half a day or a day turning that little bit. That would take me half an hour, you know. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is for people to get into it, really.
Yeah, partnership, collaboration, I'm guessing, is probably key to that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why people realise that they need to do it. You know, there's an opening for contractors to go around and do everybody's manure. We've got a lot of livestock. You know, everybody should be composting their muck out of their yards and everything.
And is it very simple? So if you're saying you bring in horse manure and cattle manure, I'm guessing sometimes it's at different times. Can you, it looks a nice pretty line there, but is that before you do that, or how do you actually put it together, or can you add to that and turn it in, or do you have to, sort of add a little bit with the forklift?
I tip it up myself with a trailer, and I add various other things. I put a bit of gypsum in, and I inoculate it with some really nice topsoil. The very best soil you can find in your garden that really smells good, and the compost ends up smelling like that because I've sort of seeded it with a little bit of soil to start with, and I just layer that in a trailer, muck in, then a few bits and pieces on the top, and tip it out in a line, tidy the line up with my loader, so that it'll go through first time, and that's it really. Okay, we can do the next slide if you want. Just going to talk about mycorrhizal fungi testing really. I've been doing this for quite a few years, and it measures as a percentage of the root area that's colonised by mycorrhizal fungi. And obviously brassicas and most of the weeds don't associate with mycorrhizae. Cereals are sort of medium mycorrhizal association, and then the higher plants like legumes and perennial ryegrasses and linseed are considered higher plants. They can have up to sort of 70 or 80% colonisation. Now, when I started testing my wheat roots, we were getting sort of 25, 30%, and that was considered pretty good for a cereal, and I was quite happy with that. But as time has gone on, those levels have got higher and higher, and you can see from this slide that I've done some variety trials for KWS. Actually wanted to see how their varieties behave in a no-till situation, whether they yield the same. And it was a good opportunity to test and find out their mycorrhizal performance. So you can see the blue lines, roots taken in March, and there's one variety there which was quite high, Silverstone. But by July, we took another set of samples, and we're up to sort of 70, 80% on some. The lab that did the testing never ever seen wheat with this sort of level of mycorrhizae before. That has sort of broken all the records. But what I wanted to show is that all these new varieties are all capable of performing in a low input, more biological system. A lot of people sort of accuse the new varieties of having been bred and mollycoddled in high input systems and are only suitable for that, but I don't think that's true. I went through a period of sort of growing, thinking that wheat wouldn't really perform on a low input system, and I started growing triticale and oats and more barley, thinking that they were sort of less highly bred and it would work better. But after seeing these results, I've gone back to growing as much wheat as possible. They're all perform. They're really resilient. All these varieties. I should say that all my wheat I grow a mixture of a blend of 4 Group 4 wheat varieties, and I've been saving that over the years and re-drilling it. It always out yields in these trials all the other varieties. The mixture does, even though they're sort of slightly older varieties, but that's another subject. Okay, the last one, could just go on to the last slide. This is just a few points really referring to growing wheat. I've mentioned my blend of varieties. It's just a really good way of getting more diversity into your crop and slowing down the spread of diseases really. They seem to complement each other, and that works really well. So I originally mixed up 4 varieties, and I've saved the seed from them. I think it's about 5th year now, and really I've lost all interest in recommended lists and new varieties and anything like that. This is way better for me. It's adjusting, and it's most suited to my soil and my system, and it's evolving all the time. I don't use any seed dressings anymore. Just you know, I usually get the wheat tested for any disease, but it never comes with anything on. I'm quite happy to just put seed through the dresser and drill it. The sort of thing is, you have to be a little bit brave to do these things, but once you realise that a healthy soil is going to protect your crop, you realise you can sort of have a go at cutting out a few things.
Yeah, just when you're on the blend of 4 varieties, that have been, you know, we've probably done it quite a lot in the past, and there's a few people who have sort of stuck to it. I mean, obviously in the natural selection, you'll tend to end up with one of more variety than the others predominantly. Does that happen, or do you bother, or how do you adjust the blend, if you like? Do you add an odd bag of this every season, or?
Yeah, that is exactly what happens. In trials in the past I've done, there's a variety, Conqueror, which is hardly grown now, but it always out-yielded all the other varieties. It's just slightly taller variety, it grows differently, and it just performed really well on my soil in a no-till situation. Now it's one of the 4 varieties, but it's moved up to about 35% right from 25. But if that's going to yield more than the others, then I want more of it in the mix. So that's just a natural evolution, really.
Yeah. One of the questions, just to roll through them as well, is how long have you been actually doing this sort of practice for? I mean, I know it just sort of happens over time. What was the sort of key factor that started the chain reaction of events?
You mean the growing the system, or the varieties you're talking about?
Well, I suppose to get, where do the varieties come into the system, really? Is that sort of towards the end, or was that something you introduced 10 years ago, or?
Well, that was an idea I had 5 years ago, but I think, wherever you are, you should get straight into that. Even on a conventional farming system would benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it's one of those things. Could you do it with milling varieties as well? If you blended 4 milling varieties together, would that?
Yeah, I think you could do. Yeah,
it's not a strength.
Some people have just started trying milling varieties, and there's no reason why the millers wouldn't accept it. I know they're specific, this variety or that variety, but really a lot of them, they don't know what varieties they are anyway, and a blend of milling varieties would work really well, I'm sure.
Yeah, perfect. No, well, that's great, Simon. I think we'll need to thank you very much for your presentation. Unfortunately, very capped for time in these webinars, trying to keep them just to that hour and 20 minutes or so. So we'll move on now. We've got Tim Barton, who's ready and waiting to jump in there. So we'll hand over to you, Tim, and I'm trying to get through the questions. There are quite a lot coming in, so I'll try and get through them as best I can. Thank you, guys.
Good evening to everybody. I'm Tim Barton. I'm the farm manager here at Fruit Park Farm. I try to farm here as biologically as possible, always relying on biology in the first instance. So I don't use insecticides. I try not to use fungicides. I don't P&K fertiliser. I don't use seed dressings. I'm all the while trying to work with nature. And I find when you work with nature and stop trying to fight nature, life is a whole lot easier. She's got all the answers. We've stepped in thinking we could do better. She was doing far better than we ever could in the first instance, and we've got to really relearn now how to be farmers, in my mind. I think the last century will be known as the chemical sort of century, and I firmly believe this century will be the biological century. Biology's got all the answers. We just need to find out more. Here at the farm, I do as wide a rotation as I can and as many different crops as I can. I believe the more variation in the rotation is better for the biology in the soil, and always trying to interact cover crops in that rotation as much as possible, and as many different species in that cover crop as possible, just because it interacts with more biology, and then we're going to have a healthy soil. And once the healthy soil starts to work, as Simon was just saying, the mycorrhizal fungi comes back and we get all those interactions and synergies going on. And once we get that, we get a healthy plant. And in my mind, once we've got that healthy plant, we're going to have healthy people. And it's going to save everybody's a lot of money, and we're going to be all a lot healthier. But it's something we've all got to start and do. We can't just carry on polluting everything and turning a blind eye. We as farmers have been led down this path, in my mind, of using lots and lots of inputs. And it's time to change. We can't keep having all these dead zones in our oceans. We can't keep blocking all our estuaries up with soil. Soil is so precious. Without soil, there is no life. Soil gives us air. It cleans our water. It gives us food. It's just a fantastic material, but it's a finite resource, and we've got to respect it and look after it. And I think it's time to address that balance. There's a really good book by David Montgomery talking about soil. And in that book, every civilization that's failed on this planet has always failed because they didn't look after their soil and they've got no food. And it's just something we've all really got to respect, and it's really good that we're all starting to. Next slide, please. This is the 750 drill I use on the farm. I've modified it quite a bit to suit everything that I've wanted to do. The first thing was I needed a liquid applicator system on there because I brew up biology. I try to use phosphorus releasing bacteria and nitrogen fixing bacteria along with trichoderma. So if there is any fusarium, for instance, on the seed, the trichoderma will eat it up. The air is 78% nitrogen and it's free. Why would we not want to use that? It's just ludicrous to me that we're buying nitrogen and we're using, what, 40% of it, 60% at the very best. If we was buying any other product and that was what you was getting, you'd be really annoyed, I think. And the air, it's full of nitrogen. And so just to fix, over the years, I've proved that I can fix anywhere between 40 to 100 kilos. The first year I tried it, I knocked 40 kilos of air off the application, and I had an extra ton to the hectare. And it's just a remarkable thing, and we've still got so much to learn about it. The drill has got row cleaners on. They're there if we're in high residue canopy on the soil. They just clean a small slot just so we're not getting any air pinning, or I'm not putting loads of carbon down next to the seed. Once it gets wet, we start to get a bit of acid there. So it just cleans that out. I've got sorry, Chris.
No, I was just going to say, when you're going with the drill and the row cleaners especially, there are quite a few people that are looking at this type of system. What sort of side it made you go for the row cleaners? Was it a necessity? Did the drill not work, or is it just a
my combine, the chaff spreaders on my combine, it's a wide cut and it doesn't spread the chaff brilliantly. So I was having a problem drilling oilseed rape, where I was getting this acid breakdown, especially if we had some rain. And you could see where the rows of the combine was, because the oilseed rape was going slightly yellow. And so since I put the row cleaners on, it's alleviated that problem. And also if I'm drilling into chopped straw, again, it alleviates the problem because I'm always making that seed to soil contact.
So it is like the straw can be a significant issue in these types of systems.
It can be, especially with the hair pinning. It's literally, if the straws lay across the slot, the disc hits it, it goes down like that. As the soil dries out, it springs up and springs the seed out. It can be a problem, but the row cleaners do the job. I mean, you could get away with just running the discs over really shallowly. If I disc, it's only ever half an inch because I don't believe that does any damage to anything. But it just gets that straw inoculated with soil, so it breaks down a little bit quicker. But it also alleviates the hair pinning problem, really, everything I've tried with it. But the row cleaners save that pass and just save disturbing the soil.
Yeah, and the biology you're applying, is that in place of a seed treatment, or is the background to that?
Originally it was, because the trichoderma does the job if there is a little bit of fusarium there or anything. But since I'm moving more down the biological route, I save all my own seed, as Simon does, And I do mix milling wheat varieties to get the benefits of the different varieties. But with using bacillus, when I did tests last year, where I hadn't treated, I had 36% fusarium. Where I put bacillus on, I had 2% fusarium. So I'm not having that carryover, one in the straw to the next crop or in the seed. So I'm already alleviating the problem, and it's just everything getting healthier, really.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for that, Tim. Good.
I also try and do companion cropping. So the front hopper there, I've adapted it so I can blow into the venturi of the drill. So if I'm drilling oilseed rape, for instance, I companion crop with berseem clover and white clover. So the berseem goes in that front hopper, the white clover goes in the rear hopper, and I can distribute that, or I put boron granules in the back hopper. Years ago, when we used to have brome problems, I put Avidex through it. Since moving down this system, I don't really get brome anymore. It really doesn't worry me. Blackgrass we've had come in the farm, but I have a zero tolerance on it, and it's never got established. It is in the area, but it's just not comfortable here. And brome isn't comfortable here at all. It just doesn't like the atmosphere anymore.
I think that's definitely music to our ears. So can you explain a little bit more about that?
On the brome side?
Yeah. How are you?
Brome, when I was strip tilling quite a few years ago, I did have an awful lot of brome. I had every type of brome going. It was a concern, but when I've widened the rotation and gone more spring cropping, that really helped. And we've not disturbing the soil. I just don't have the brome coming. Nick Woodjack, who's my agronomist, last year we came and he found some brome and it died naturally. It just was not comfortable in the soil. I think because it's gone more fungal, more aerobic, the brome just isn't comfortable there, and it died naturally, which we'd never seen before.
Good. Yep, Simon, on you go.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, in the past, I used to have terrible problems with brome, 20, 25 years ago, but I don't see any at all now. I don't know why that is. You'd think the system would favour brome, but no, it's disappearing. It's still all there in the hedges and hedge bottoms on the banks. Don't seem to see it.
It just doesn't concern me anymore. It just doesn't. It's not on my agenda anymore. I just don't have a problem. Last year, I've got weeds this year that I haven't used any spring herbicide on. I didn't do any autumn herbicide other than using glyphosate. And I haven't done any spring herbicide either because there just isn't any weeds there. Because the soil's covered, it's protected. There isn't that need for weeds to germinate. The soil's got that massive weed bank. And when I first went down this system, people were saying, "Oh, you'll get rid of your weed bank. Get rid of your weed bank." I don't want to get rid of my weed bank. My weed bank's my indicator. It's my toolkit to see what's going on. And those weeds are there. There's a reason they're there for 60 years as seeds. And the soil, that's their protection. If we've made a bloody mess of it, those weeds will germinate to protect itself. The soil knows what it's doing. It's just we've got to work with it. And with keeping the soil covered, I just don't seem to be having the weed problems anymore. It's just, I only ever really do one herbicide in the spring anyway. I never do any autumn herbicides because there just isn't the need.
Yeah, see, that was going to be my sort of lead on to the next question. So you've backed off the autumn herbicide option, pre-emergence, that side of thing, but the glyphosate is still there. So it's not like you've stopped the glyphosate and just using the pre-herbicides.
I drill what's known as drilling on the green, so I'll always drill into cover, and then I'll spray off, probably, depends on germination and weather conditions and everything else, but I'll probably spray off 3 to 5 or 6 days after drilling. And then by the time that cover crop started to die off, the wheat's coming through, I don't have the slug issues because if I'm drilling into oilseed rape, the slugs will keep eating into the oilseed rape. They normally leave my wheat alone. Occasionally it goes wrong, but it's very rare. I use many slug pellets now, if at all. But it's just keeping that canopy there and keeping the armoury of that soil protected. And then the soil knows it doesn't need to do anything. It's protected, it's covered, it's safe.
So in that slug scenario, for instance, if you're wheat after oilseed rape, you would leave the oilseed rape to the spring? Is that sort of roughly where I'm thinking you're going? And then you would just take that out?
No, I glyphosate out 3 to 6 days after drilling the wheat. And then by the time the oilseed rape has died off, the wheat's coming through, and it's normally getting later into the season and the slugs are going deeper, and it's not a problem. But we've not using the insecticides on the farm for 5 years now. I've got that many predators building up. I don't have a problem with things. I've got carabid beetles that are just gobbling up. When I go looking for slugs, I find beetles, and the beetles are eating the eggs. So the whole thing's working. Same as I've got oilseed rape in the rotation. Yes, I get a little bit of flea beetle, but I don't get much. Not enough to warrant a spray, even if I was spraying, because I've got that predators there. But once you use an insecticide, you're on that hamster wheel. And once you've knocked everything out, you won't kill all your flea beetles, you won't kill all your aphids, but I guarantee you'll kill all your predators. And so then that's it. Nature has got no way of protecting itself. So you are back on that hamster wheel of having to use insecticides all the while.
Yeah, which is very difficult. No, thanks very much.
Nature had got the answers. That's, I always go on, but nature has got all the answers. We just need to listen and look again. Our forefathers were far better farmers in my mind because they used the natural elements that they got, whereas we sort of thought we'd know better by using chemicals. But the rate we're losing chemicals, we can't depend on them. So for me, they're my backup, they're my get out of jail card. If I need to do something, I will, because we've got to remain profitable. We're not in this for fun. But it's just working with nature. Nature has got the answers. We just need to work with her.
Yeah,
David.
And just
interesting, Tom.
Is glyphosate glyphosate loss a big issue?
I think I can get around it. It's one of my favourite ways of destroying a cover crop is to roll on a frost. If I can roll when it's -4, I get that shattering effect. Whereas if you roll when it's just frozen, yes, it'll kill it, but it just lies it flat. When I roll when it's -4, it just shatters like glass. And the little bits, as long as I've had a really good cover crop, the little bits, if I had some grass weeds left, I could take them out with a graminicide, no problem. So I'm always trying to work away from glyphosate, and the same I use this time. I've tried a crimper roller. So if it's not this winter, we didn't have any frost here where I could roll. So I used the crimper roller in the spring to try and do the job. And I think we can all get round it. We just haven't thought about it yet. I think it's wrong just to think we're doomed if we lose glyphosate. I think we just need to think about it more. And there's loads of cultural methods that we can do. So no, it doesn't frighten me one bit.
Just going to pick up on that interesting comment, Tim, about working with nature. Because if you look historically at most of the products we have used, are pesticides, etc., nature's overcome most of them, or in the process of overcoming them. So, is the definition of insanity or stupidity not doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? So we really got to change our tack and start working with nature, even if it means a fairly dramatic swing in the crops that we actually produce, instead of just bashing on regardless, because that's what we've always done.
I think that's the other thing that's really been apparent on the farm is the amount of wildlife that have come back since we've gone down this route. Everything's coming back, and we're just abundant. We had 300 golden plover roosting on here over the winter. We've got skylarks galore. We've got everything's coming back because we're working with nature and the food source is there. So we've got kestrels nesting back on the farm. Everything is just, the whole ecosystem is working, and because of that, it's I have a bird ringing group come on, and they just say it's the best restaurant in town, and everything flocks here because there's loads of food because I'm supplying it. But it's just working in harmony with nature, but we're also more profitable, we're more sustainable. So there's nothing not to like about the system in my mind. Next slide, please. This is just showing the power of roots. Why would anybody want to put steel in the ground and burn more carbon when plants were designed to do the job for us? It's this is a beans and vetch and rye cover crop. I'll follow that with spring barley. So my whole idea is to build as much fertility as I possibly can. I then follow in the spring barley with a lot less nitrogen, as we'll see in a later slide. But that's just showing that, that's just a beautiful root structure. The nodules were there, everything's working as it should. Next slide, please. That's just a dry matter report that I had done. It's just showing the amount of nitrogen that we can grow. So there was 240 kilos of nitrogen there. In that particular year, I didn't manage to retain that nitrogen. I lost it to the atmosphere, but since then I've introduced the rye. So when the beans die off and they they release that nitrogen. Hopefully the rye takes it up, which it seems to be working. So I think I've overcome that problem. But you can just see by the amount of elements that are there. Cover crops work, they pay for themselves. The carbon they fix, everything's worthwhile about a cover crop. Again, I can't understand why anybody wouldn't want to do it, really. Next slide. That's just the introduction of sheep. Sheep, they're just mobile composters. They do all that job for me. They obviously pay a rent for coming in, so it covers the seed. So the cover crops are all the while paying for themselves, but I've had all that carbon back in the soil. And I've got that nutrition there ready for the next crop. It's just working again with nature as nature intended. Nature never intended monocropping anything. Nature always has diversity there because the biology just reacts differently with different plants. And those interactions and those synergisms, it's just all feeding back the soil. Plants are the driver of healthy soil. And it's just working with plants, working with nature, but putting the right plants in there to get the right cover crop to get the result you want. Next slide, please. That's just another 10 species cover crop that, as I say, if I could get up to 20 species, I'd love to. It's the more diversity we can have in there, the better. And having cover crops at different rooting depths, they're just doing the job for you. Why would anybody want to spend hours and hours on a tractor, spending money, burning carbon? And you can just plant a crop and just let nature do it for you, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they don't ask much in return. It's just working with nature. Next slide, please. That is some winter wheat just drilled into a 5-year lay. I put that in just to show it can be done. Sometimes the amount of carbon lockup can be a problem just at the start, but it overcomes, and I've done it for quite a few years now. It always turns out to be a really good crop. And again, the one, I mean, that's a 2 or 3 haylage cuts a year. We do haylage for horses, and you don't get compaction once your soil starts working. It's my soil is just like a sponge, and it just springs back up, and we've driven over it. So that's had 5 years of 2 to 3 cuts of haylage a year, and so there just didn't. You wouldn't find any compaction. Once that biology starts working, and you've got all those worms working, the soil just lifts. You can feel it under your feet. It's just like a sponge when you walk across our soil here, and you just don't need to interfere. Just let nature do the job for you. Just help her along. Next slide, please. That's just my brewing tank that I brew up biology. I brew up biology to combat disease. I also brew up to fix nitrogen and release phosphorus. And it's still an ongoing learning curve. We've got so much to learn about biology. Unfortunately, it's got to come from us, the farmers. I encourage everybody just to share what they're doing, and let's learn from each other and move forward at a faster pace. It's one of my big frustrations is we have to wait 12 months before we can try something else. And so if we can all talk to each other and share our experiences, we just move the whole thing on a lot faster. But people think brewing is all technical, but it's really simple process. It's just a matter of putting a food source there with the biology and brew it for 24 hours, and the brew is ready to use. If you can get compost teas, which goes down a different route, then you're adding even more biology. So the crop response is just fantastic. Next slide, please. I do an awful lot of tissue testing. Biologies are fantastic, and once you do get that soil working, I do believe the soil will provide everything. We shouldn't need to get involved. But in years like this, where it's dry, you know, biology has its levels, and you've got to be able to step in. And the whole thing for this way of farming for me is I haven't got a set plan at the start of the season. I know I don't want to use fungicides if I can help it, but if I have to, I'll step in with the fungicide. And the same with nutrition. I tissue test and I find out what's going on in that plant. It's not set in stone that tissue test is dead right. If we had some rain or it was a bit warmer, it will change from week to day, but it's just giving us a bit of a feeling of where it's going. So then I will step in and go with a foliar. And that was just showing the difference of the plant needing a foliar and me putting foliar nutrition on. I believe once you get the nutrition right and that plant's just so strong that disease just won't come in. It's just like a healthy human being, you know, you just won't get that problem. And it's just, again, just getting it right, really, but it's all ongoing. Next slide, please. This is a spring barley trial that I always do. The following slide will explain it more, but basically the results on the left, as I'm looking at it, above the spring barley writing, is my conventional approach, where that would have had 120 kilos of N, and at the time that had a full fungicide program, and the results on the right were a 40 kilo soil application of N, and then using nitrogen fixing bacteria and the previous cover crop to provide all the nutrition. And I think those results just speak for themselves. You can see the nitrogen's a bit high, and it was high that year in the rest of the crop on that side. It was just perfect, really, because again, I'm working with nature. The combine, you couldn't, if anything, the results on the right, the trial, yielded slightly heavier than the conventional side. Yeah, what's not to like? Next slide, please. That is a picture of the field. So on the left was the trial, and on the right was the null program. So saving £50 a hectare, but it's not just saving that £50 a hectare. It's the fact I haven't put that fungicide on, so I'm not having that effect on the fungi in the soil. If I'm going to put a fungi killer on the crop, of course, in my mind, it's going to have an effect on the fungi on the soil. It's not going to be comfortable with something coming down. It's going to be trying to kill fungus basically. So I'm all the while trying to move away, but at the same time, we've got to be a profitable business. So it's the management side of it is a bit harder. I'm looking at crops a bit more regular than what I normally would. So I try to look every 2 to 3 days and just monitor and make reactions. But biology has worked really well for me in those instances. Next slide, please. This is my, that was Crusoe week last year. And last year I was using Bacillus subtilis and Bacillus amyliquifasciens. Amyliquifasciens is like the big brother of the subtilis. So if the Bacillus subtilis don't eat the brown rust, and the amyliquifasciens will eat brown rust. And that was just showing to prove to any skeptics that it did work. I missed a patch in the field and it was full of brown rust, and I had a yield loss there, whereas the rest of the field, all my wheats did between 9 and 11 tonnes to the hectare last year, which is fantastic for me. It's a big result. But again, I'm not putting that fungicide on to do the damage to the soil in my mind, just having a healthier crop. And I think Simon's proved in the past that by putting fungicides on, all the chemical companies will claim that they give us a yield enhancement, but they don't always, and Simon's trials has proved that, which it just shows that they're not always the way forward in my mind. And if we can use biology and not be polluting our water, it's got to be the right move for all of us as a world. There is no planet B. We've got to start and look after this planet, but we've also got to feed ourselves, and we've got to do it commercially. And it's just learning how we can, in my mind, and going with it. I then went on to do a T3 of Bacillus, and as I said, it did control the fusarium far better than a chemical would. I think most fusarium chemicals are about 60% control. Bacillus had about 80% control, so it was far better in my mind. I think that's my last slide, is it? Yeah.
Yep. Thanks. So thanks very much, Tim. Cracking session. Obviously, I'm getting a real row for running so far over time, which we're obviously great at. But Fiona's doing a good job of pulling us round as well. So thanks very much, Tim. We could have gone on for hours on that, and we probably will do more in the future without it. So we'll just hand over to Brian now, if that's okay, to rattle us through how he's been ground truthing some of these things and something in himself.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Wow. How do you follow that? So is everyone else getting feedback, or is that just me? No, that's fine. So yeah, so what we're doing on the strategic farm is obviously Simon and Tim are quite a long way down their regenerative agriculture pathway, and so what we're trying to do on the strategic farm is sort of bridge that gap between what people who are starting off and going to that end point. And so we're trying to lower our inputs as much as possible, and do on-farm demonstrations for everyone to sort of follow. And we've been doing a lowered input trial for the last 2 years. We've repeated it this year. So Fiona can pass it on. So what we've done is have a field which has got 5 varieties. Section is untreated, and then we've tried to go as low as we can, and then have medium investment and high investment. and we tried to sort of do it with looking at what the state of play was in the field, as well as what the weather was coming to as well. So this is the 2019 demonstration. So this, you can find the handouts from last year on the AHDB website, and we've repeated it in the same field. So these next few slides are going to be what we saw going through. So we've been varying the fungicides, the PGRs, any insecticides, basically anything that goes through the sprayer. Fertilizer was kept standard. It was the first week after linseed, direct drilled straight into that linseed stubble, and we were trying to sort of show that what could happen if you started to sort of rein back. So we're going to go through these slides quite quickly due to time, but you can see these are the pictures of the different varieties as it was just basically dying off before harvest. And you can see that in the high scenarios, we had bought quite a lot of green leaf, and then where the untreated and the low was, we sort of had lost sort of green leaf. And this was basically highlighted all the way through. Some varieties were different than, to others. And so if we move on to the next variety, you can see where the variety package actually makes quite a big difference. So Graham is a good all-rounder, and you can see that the low treatment was better than Silverstone. And again, the high was very green, medium as well, but the untreated was showing quite a lot of green leaf. So moving on to the next variety. So Siskin, another good all-rounder for variety package, again showed good response in keeping things green in a low scenario, where we had invested a bit more in the medium and high. We had actually kept more green leaf, and it was asking those questions of, was that green leaf going to pay off in the end? Was it going to bring back more yield? Was it going to sort of pay for what we had actually invested for those different plots? So it was quite an interesting thing. So when we move on to the next variety, Chabras, we've got a really good one with, this is one pretty much, this and the next variety had the worst untreated plots really. Santiago, the old stalwart that always seems to break down, but has performed really well for us on our farm. But you can see that with the inputs that we invested, there's quite a big spend difference between the plots, which are all in the handout from last year, so you can go back and look at them. But you can see there's quite a lot of difference. So if you're starting out and you're thinking, should I be sort of cutting back? How can I cut back? There is quite a lot of stuff that you can do on your own farms, in your own fields, to look at it. So what happened when this was taken to yield? So this is the combine, and this is, yeah, so this is the yield. So on the left-hand side is the actual yield from plot to plot. It's all been ranked on the right-hand side, and you can see that last year, well, the highs were performing really well. So if you wanted to go and buy yield, 12 ton, 12.5 ton in the highs, it showed that what that extra green leaf had been kept. But then when you look at the low and the untreated, we still got 10 tons a hectare in the untreated Graham, and very close to it with the Silverstone and Siskin. So you can see that actually doing nothing was quite yield maintaining as well. And okay, this is different seasons have different disease pressures, but you can see that actually this is what surprised me, that the untreated area was doing really well. So then when we use the benchmarking tools within the AHDB, we put this all into crop bench, farm bench, and so we started breaking it into the gross margins and net margins. So hopefully the next slide will show gross margin, and you can see that where we had actually reined right back, the payback was for a gross margin was always in favor of the low and the medium. The untreated obviously lost out on the yield, and it basically shows that you can sort of get quite a profitable crop of wheat. But then when you move it into a cost of production scenario, so per ton, so the next slide, you can really show what we're looking at, and the low and the untreated were the top 6 for actual net margin, so actual cost of production, when we factored in machinery passes, not spraying as much, not as many passes with the sprayer. So it really showed that if you're looking to sort of rein it back. You can in certain scenarios, and when you're starting off in this journey, I'm trying to do as much as we can to reduce our use of inputs on our farm. And this year we've taken this further. This year we've got a very, very low input field where I've only spent £7 on one fungicide because we found that we had yellow rust at T1, so we just put a little bit of Teb on then. So and it actually looks really good. It's right behind my house. It's right behind the village, so it's quite a good advert for sort of reducing sort of your passes with a sprayer. But there's work going on. We've repeated it, as I said, this year, so it's going to be a different scenario. But it just shows that you can do it. It's a really hard process and I found it very hard personally trying to wean myself off inputs. Weaning yourself off the blue bag scenario of taking 20 kilos of N off and just weaning yourself off, getting your soil working. We're obviously down 5 years down strip tilling and direct drilling, but I still do use the plough when required. And I'm trying to do less is more in the cultivation world. So I'm just trying to sort of do it. And obviously Tim and Simon have shown that biology and everything that we can get our soils doing is fantastic, and we can all get there, but you can transition, and this is what this demonstration is trying to do, that shows that in certain scenarios you can. So I think I've got a slide to sum up. This is the repeat. So yeah, so don't get sort of disheartened. This is if you try it and it backfires, every year is different, and that's the beauty of farming, that every year is different. And so we need to sort of try and make sure that we're doing things, and it comes down to your attitude of risk, and this is where it comes back to risk management. Farming, I've always said farming is gambling. You don't know how much you're going to get paid, you don't know how much you're going to go back, you don't know how much whether we're going to get the rain, sunlight. There's so much risk involved in farming. It's your attitude to risk which really is what we're trying to sum up and get better.
Perfect. No, that's great. Thanks very much, Brian. It does a great snapshot there of just how to get into it in on-farm trials and what you think you can do on your own farm to try and get, if this is the route you want to go down, you can start trialing things there to see what works for you before you get so in depth down the composting route and purchases, drill and whatnot else. So we'll quickly move on to Catherine Harries just now. We are running quite over time. I mean, I'm quite enjoying this as well, so it's great to have all these speakers here. And there will be questions later on, and the session is being recorded, so it will be put out later on, emailed around everybody and onto YouTube. So just to point that out, and we'll hand over to Catherine. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, I'll try and be quick, take you through how we can go about deciding when to lower fungicide inputs in wheat. So most growers do the standard T0, 1, 2, 3 program. Some add in extra T1.5 and T4, but we need to examine every single one of these to see if we need them at all. So how do we do this? It starts at the beginning of the season by looking at your main disease risks. So variety, drilling date, rotation, and we'll look at a couple of these in a bit more detail in a minute. So you come up with a general fungicide program based on these risk factors, and then adjust the program depending on the weather and the disease levels throughout the season. So a key way to monitor disease levels is to leave an untreated area in one field of each variety and assess the differences in disease levels between your treated and untreated areas. And this shows you the relative contribution that fungicides are making compared to other elements of your disease management strategy. And in turn, this shows you how much you might be able to cut back on fungicides within that season and in future season. And it's important that the farmer, as well as the agronomist, does this, as the more information you both have to decide on fungicide programs, the better the decision that will be made. And we actually ran a webinar this morning on this topic, looking at how you can disease assess and monitor the development of your crops. So please do go and watch that if you get the chance. So, sorry, not quite yet, Fiona. So one example of how you might use disease monitoring to cut back on your program is deciding not to do a T0. So trials have shown that there's no yield benefit from controlling septoria at only in the event of a weather delayed T1 you might get a benefit from it. So that timing is only targeting the rusts, and these only need to be high-risk situation, so in a susceptible variety, or if you're seeing active rust there. And in the poll earlier, it looks like quite a few of you haven't used a T0 this season, so that's really interesting to see. And then moving on to T2, you can look at your disease levels in your treated and untreated areas, use it in combination with the weather. So for example, this year there's not been a lot of septoria lower down in the canopy, and it's been dry, and it's been forecast to be dry, although hopefully we'll get a bit of rain tomorrow. So you could have made the decision to cut back on your T2, but it's still important to control rust at this timing if you see them. So we'll now just look at a couple of these disease management strategies in a bit more detail. So move on, Fiona, please. So firstly, drilling date. So this chart is from an ADAS-led project looking at fungicide yield response in 3 varieties with different septoria resistance when drilled in mid-September and mid-October. And this chart shows results averaged over 9 sites in 2016 and 2017. And they found that in an untreated situation with no fungicides applied, a moderately susceptible variety, so JB Diego, which is a 5 for septoria, sown in mid-September, was comparable to a susceptible variety, so Santiago rated 4 for septoria, sown in mid-October. And also a moderately resistant variety, so Revelation with a 6, sown in mid-September, was comparable to JB Diego, sown in mid-October. So this shows the power that delayed drilling can have to reduce disease risk, and something you can factor in when deciding whether to cut back on fungicide spend. Next slide, please. So another major way to reduce fungicide inputs is through variety. So let's look at some of the evidence for this. This is one of the charts you can see if you look at the new recommended list variety selection tool. So this shows the yield benefit of applying fungicides to a range of varieties. And this treatment benefit is shown along the side. And along the bottom, we've got agronomic merit, which is the disease resistance package of each variety and also its lodging. So a higher agronomic merit is a better disease resistance. And we can see that the treatment benefit ranges from less than a tonne per hectare for the more septoria resistant varieties such as KWS 6 Days and Theodore, to over 3 tonnes per hectare for the more susceptible varieties such as Leeds and Zulu. And historically, these more septoria resistant varieties had a lower fungicide treated yield than the more susceptible varieties, but this gap is closed now, meaning there's very little reason not to be growing these more resistant varieties. And in an untreated situation, the more resistant varieties yield an average of 2 tonnes per hectare more than the susceptible varieties. So in other words, not treating KWS 6 Days will on average result in a 5% yield penalty, but not treating a variety like Leeds or Zulu will result in about a 35% yield penalty. So for me, this is really strong evidence that you can cut back on your fungicide input in these more resistant varieties. But this chart shows the average results over the whole country from all the RL trials averaged over 5 years. But we all know there are differences in disease between years, region, and even trials within a region. So move on, please, Fiona. So this chart shows the treatment benefit for a few varieties at individual trials across the UK in 2019. So the coloured spots on the map are different recommended list trials, and the chart shows the range of treatment benefits for each of these varieties across these trials. So they've all got different septoria resistances, and you can see that underneath the variety name. And we can see across the varieties, the treatment benefit was generally smallest in the Hampshire and Edinburgh trials and biggest in Cornwall and Spalding. And that probably reflects the high septoria pressure in Cornwall and the high rust pressure in Spalding. But the range of treatment benefits also varies across varieties. So KW 6 Days consistently has the smallest treatment benefit at every site, whilst Costello is a bit more variable. across sites. And this isn't available yet in the variety selection tool, but hopefully it will allow us to interrogate long-term data from a region or a site at some point. And that will be really useful for knowing about regional disease risk. And as Brian said, for me, it really just boils down to what risk you're prepared to take. And you can reduce your risk substantially by growing a more resistant variety. Thank you, that's me.
Perfect, thanks very much, Catherine. It's great to see the recommended list tool. We have certainly added quite a bit on it to Bastian as well, and they do take a lot of the comments forward, and they can certainly analyse a lot of the data much quicker and better now with this tool rather than just reading from a book. So thanks very much for that, Catherine. Right, now we're completely over time. There's obviously a lot of questions in here. So as we say, this session has been recorded. So thanks very much for everyone attending. We're going to go through the questions now. And I'm taking a lot out of this. So I'm going to ask the questions, and we are going to go over time. So hang around if you want, it's up to yourself. But we're going to go through the questions now with the panel. So you guys can put your cameras back on, and we'll just start and go through them, and then we'll finish. Okay, so a few of them. The one we'll just kick off, David Rhodes. Is ploughing bad? They did plough for generations. Is it just the depth we plough now? So there's a perfect start for you. What's so wrong with ploughing? It seems to have worked for our forefathers. Why do we need to stop?
I think our forefathers, they were ploughing a lot shallower, so it worked. But ploughing, you're just burying all that biology. Why would you want to do that to your soil? You're destroying all that structure. When you've got the globale in there, it's creating all those glues, which creates all those aggregates, and the minute it holds it all together, so you're not going to get soil loss. But the minute you drop that ploughing, it's just like somebody putting a ball and chain for your house. And just as you start to put those few bricks, somebody put the ball and chain for your house, you're never going to build a structure. And that's what's wrong with ploughing. And why would you want to do it? Why would you want to spend all that money?
Treadmill effect. So once you start one thing, you just have to keep running, perhaps with it. You know, we're not saying there's anything wrong with ploughing. If you need to plough, you need to plough. People have their reasons. It can be a simple, small-scale operation. I completely understand that, and you know, but there are other ways of doing it. I think that's absolutely what we're exploring here. And David, you've kind of stopped ploughing mostly a bit.
We've tried to stop ploughing. Yes, We've seen in the short time that we've been in this situation, the strength of our soils improve hugely. One or two fields we're seeing this year compaction from last year's wet harvest, and it's generally the land that was ploughed for that crop the previous year due to rotational restrictions. Anything that's been shallow cultivated or no-tilled over that period can just carries the traffic even under the wet conditions so much better. But I always find it quite amusing when people talk about ploughing to control weeds, and I think, well, if ploughing was so good at controlling weeds, surely by now we wouldn't have any weeds left, but they keep coming back.
And I would just add that you can just stop, or we're trying to do a transition, so we're trying to sort of go from a plough-based system and moving up into a shallow system. So it really is. I'd like to know what Simon and Tim, how did you transition from your previous system, and how long has it taken you to get to that point? Because I think this is a really important thing. If people are starting that journey, Simon and Tim, you'd probably be going, what, 10 years, 15 years to get to where you've got that lovely soil working for you. I'm only in year 5 of trying to lift my whole operation up to the surface and go direct drilling. And I'm still finding the pitfalls, and it's still trying to find that transition period. So it'd be interesting to know how long it actually took you to get to that point.
I mean, my ploughing was never a successful thing for me to do. It just, if I ploughed the ground and it dried out, it was impossible to make a seed bed, and it was I just avoided it at all costs, really. And you saw the photograph of my soil now. There's no way I would go and plough that. It would just be a ruination of 15 years of work. I'd rather not grow a crop than plough it. I'll just leave it alone wait until I can drill when the conditions are right. But I mean, it's up to farmers if they want the biology to start providing them with their nutrients, so they can cut down with the fertilizers and suppress the diseases and get healthy crops. You've got to leave the soil alone. There's no good turning the whole thing upside down, smashing it to bits, and ruining the place for the biology to live in. I mean, bacteria live for thousands of years. They don't die of old age. If you dry them out with a plough, you desiccate them, they're gone. And it's up to farmers how they want to farm, but biologically, you give them every chance.
And how, so the biology, I mean, we saw, Tim, you had pictures up there of brewing, and we've been doing a bit with Nick from Ava as well, on the brewing and the biology. How did you get into that, or how does that come about with did you know about that before, or how much research did you have to do, or did you kill it all and it was just waste? Or
20 years ago.
For me, it was all reading books, and that's where it all came from. And I think once you start to go down the journey, the right people come into your life. It's you just attract the right people. And so Nick came in, and Nick, he's probably one of the best people I know in the country on biology, and he had the answers that I wanted. But it was just also reading books that got me interested in it. And once you start to realise what biology can give, and Simon will be the same, you just can't stop reading books. There's so many out there, and you just go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. You can't stop because it's got so many answers. I do get a bit passionate about it, but biology has got all the answers, and it's just working with it, and it's just finding out what it's got. But there's so much we haven't discovered. We're just starting to understand what biology is doing. And I think going back to Brian's question, I started off on strip till, but I didn't really need to do that. It was just the fact that I needed to get my head around it, and it helped my head go along the curve. When I take land on now, I can pretty much go in straight with direct drilling, because plants will do the job for you, but it's just having the understanding of what you're doing and making the right choices. And as Simon does, growing the right crops to suit that situation. But it's mainly, most of the problems are in people's heads. It's not the soil. The soil will repair itself if you give it time. It's just getting your own head around it. People have just got this belief that you've got to cultivate and you've got to aerate the soil through cultivation, when plants have been doing it for millions of years, and they would have done a far better job than we have.
Yeah. And Simon, in your composting technique, is the next step on that to start maybe a few tea bag brews, that sort of thing? Or where do you think you're going with the compost? Do you think you'll stop just at applying it to land as a bulk manure?
I think that I probably don't need to keep doing it anymore. The system's evolved now where I shouldn't be killing stuff off anymore, and once it's there, it'll always be there until you disrupt it. I just use it for fields that I feel are not, performing quite as they should be. It's a case of going out and digging holes, and you get a feel for when the soil's right and when it isn't. And that, to me, the compost is just a quicker way of resurrecting the problem. Don't think everyone's got to go out and think they've got to go composting to sort their farm out. It's just another tool that you can use, speeds the process up a little bit.
Yeah, and a few burning questions from the Scottish contingent, which I hope we've brought with us. So we're asking the guys from down in the southeast there, what's the thoughts on livestock integration into traditional arable areas in the east of England to overcome blackgrass problems, as well as speeding up soil health? Are livestock critical in this type of system, or do you see that part of it as, we've talked about the 5 rules of regen ag? Is the livestock part crucial to it, or can you import that?
I mean, yeah, I think our livestock are brilliant. Much better to have a mixed farm than an all arable farm. It doesn't suit me because I farm completely on my own, single-handed, and I haven't got the time for a load of animals as well. So I need to devise a system that I can do it without them. That's why I grow grass seed and I grow lucerne as my sort of pot in the rotation where I can back off. That's what livestock do for you.
Exactly. So if we say, you've got the opportunity with crops further south, so you can grow lucerne, which we maybe struggle with as we go further north, and clover as you go even further north just doesn't do. So maybe that's the answer to it, that livestock down there you've got other crops that bring in that diversity, whereas we've got the opportunity with livestock, if we can fence up here, to work with it. I think, David, obviously you're working with both. You're in quite a nice part of Fife there.
Yes, I suppose our Achilles heel is the vegetables, and with all due respect to the vegetable farmers, of which we're one, this overwhelming desire to pulverise the soil, as Simon pointed out. If you keep doing that, it's perhaps a road to nowhere. So we need to try and find ways to integrate that. I look at my plate. If we don't grow vegetables on this farm, I don't mind a bit of whiskey from the malt and barley, and some gin from the wheat, and some beef. But really, that's about all there's going to be to eat. I could do with some veggies on that plate for my diet. So we need to work out how to integrate that into the system too, and not wreck the soil in that process.
Yeah, fantastic. And if we go back onto before we blend, the blends of crops that we're growing in the diversity, both in the cover crops, which we'll come to in a minute, but there was a question there about why does the mycorrhizal colonization vary between varieties, or are the results you gained within acceptable statistical tolerance of each other to ignore choosing varieties for their microbial performance? Wow, quite a question there, Jeremy Squirrel, thank you. So we'll put that out to the panel. Do you want me to repeat it, or did we get it the first time? I'll repeat it. So why does mycorrhizal colonization vary between varieties?
For me, it would vary. I think that was within the realms of where it would be.
It does vary a little bit between the varieties, but
Right, we'll go to Tim first. Tim, you speak, so there's a little bit delay on the line when you go between things here. Probably I'm the biggest one as well. So, Tim, when you go, if you shout first.
I mean, brassicas don't react with mycorrhizae, but most other plants do. Legumes and the cereals do. And I think we've still got so much to understand about it, but the realms that Simon was getting, they're not that much different in my mind. So it's learning the interactions, and I think they'll probably get higher, but it's the better the soil gets, the better the interaction.
Simon, you were going to add to that?
yeah, sorry, my connection's cracking up. I'm not hearing very well now. Try the question again.
Oh, wait a minute. Hang on a minute, I'll need to find it. We'll move on quickly anyway. I've lost the question. I want the next one. So, do we have any? Or Brian, were you going to say?
Yeah, I think there's definitely work going on next year within the Strategic Farm Network. So they're going to be looking in more depth at soil bacteria. I know that they're doing a whole series of soil tests next year, because this is a great big subject that not many people really have been able to unpick. I always call soil science a very dark science because we don't see it, and it's all going on under our feet. So there is going to be work being planned within the Strategic Farm Networks, and we're going to be comparing my soil with David's and with Rob Fox's in the West. So we should be able to start building up a bit more of a picture. So this might be a really good topic to take forward in future years for the Strategic Farm, and I'm sure the AHDB are going to be doing that in future years.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions, just moving on from that, so cover crop species. So does anyone have any concern with any species within a cover crop being detrimental to a cash crop in rotation, e.g. brassicas and OSR, beans, peas, et cetera, the build up, so we're not getting the true break by using a cover crop? Do you think that's an issue? Do you have to be wise about what you pick in a cover crop, or do you think your longevity of rotation guys would be able to sort that out? If we start, David, do you want to reel off first?
It's a concern. I mean, we're, I suppose, relatively new to this type of system, so I like to think that before our broadleaf crops and our vegetables, we can afford to have a grass or a cereal type based cover crop, and before our cereals, where the opportunity exists, we like to try and have a broadleaf cover crop. have no science to back that up at all. It's just a gut feeling. The only thing I will say, the only problem we've had with cover crops is the volunteers of rye that we seem to have coming through the system at the minute, much to our neighbours' amusement. But it just feels right to mix and match a little bit rather than thing. But I suppose if it's diverse enough and your soil biology is diverse enough, then perhaps it shouldn't matter. I don't know. That's just one of these things that's going to come out of the soil study that Brian was talking about.
Absolutely. Tim?
For me, it doesn't matter. When I first started out, I was worried about having more legumes in the rotation or more brassicas in and having them in cover crops. But as I've gone on, once the soil starts to work and it's healthy, the soil's got its own natural defence system against the pathogens coming in, and I just don't have a problem. If I'm following spring barley and I've got rye there, I do like to get the rye killed off early, because I do find if you're drilling a grass into a grass, you can have problems there. So I do like to get that killed off earlier. But it's just managing the cover crop to your situation in my mind, and it's just being realistic. And the only way you're going to really learn about it is to have a go. And it's just getting on and doing it. But I don't worry about having anything really in my cover crops, because I haven't got any problems, and I'm not having any problems. So I mix as much as I can. I think the main thing is just to get something growing. That's the real main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Simon? Oh, Brian?
Yeah,
Simon?
Yeah, I would totally agree. We've been trying cover crops all the time through sort of Monitor Farmer network and into the strategic farm, and my conclusion is more species the better. Trying to keep the cost as low as possible. We're all growing seeds. We can sort of mix our own. We can get as many different plants growing, and they all have their roles, but don't get sort of hung up on it. But you just got to go and try it. Some soils prefer different cereals. Some soils prefer different legumes. It's really just go out there and try it. And I agree with Tim, and how many species we can get in there is always going to be good, because I do feel diversity brings out a lot more of the soil benefits that a lot of people are sort of looking for. We've obviously looked at it from the nitrate leaching angle, and we've seen massive benefits of this nutrient sponge that it absorbs. And now the cover crop work that ADAS are doing with us and the Maxi cover crop to see when that nutrition is released is something that's obviously going on within the strategic farm as well. So, but diversity, I think, is the real key. Just getting numbers of different plants, weeds, as well as the crop plants you're trying to get out of it, because they all have their role to play within biology.
I think the other thing as I've found as well is by having lots and lots of different species. If it's a bad year for one species, the other species thrive. So you're just reducing that risk element by having loads of species there. If it's a bad year for one particular variety, it's a good year for something else. So it's just reducing the risk. But when it's a good year for both, they compete with each other. So the bigger the amount of species, the taller the cover crop. And what you've got above ground, you've always got more below ground in my mind. So the bigger the roots, so the more work it's actually done. But they do, they talk to each other, and it's just that interaction.
Yeah, my love-hate relationship with cover crops sort of bears around sort of the blackgrass risk, and if you get too much, then it does come later. And so we're still learning, and I swing on a pendulum. I really like them at some points, and then I can't stand them at another. I'm trying to integrate sheep into the farm rotation as well. So I've got contract grades are coming in. Sometimes they move them on time, and then sometimes they don't, and then I've seen damage done to my soil as well. So it's a real fine balance, and I think that's the real key. That it's a learning a system. It's a complete mind change, and that's what I've taken from both Simon and Tim, is that it's a complete mind change. When I was brought up and we were looking at the big pub yields and all this sort of stuff, now we're going down a much different route, and we're building a much more resilient system. And I think that's something that I think is my big takeaway from just listening to both Simon and Tim tonight.
One of the things in this, and it does, we're sort of addressing how people get into this sort of thing. Now, we do have quite a few manufacturers now shifting towards cover crops and, you know, mixes in there. And I mean, the pounds per hectares can be monopoly figures. I mean, how do you guys get around that, or what do you do about your own cover crop seed, you know, to just try and mitigate that loss of, you know, we've sort of seen the answer is not in a can or you know, not a branded can perhaps, but, you know, now it's, well, is the answer in a bag? And how expensive is that bag?
For me, I'm in the mid-tier, so my cover crops are covered on the mid-tier scheme. So that alleviates the cost for me, and I can spend a little bit more, so I don't worry too much on the cost because I'm being paid to grow it. And I was going to do it anyway, but when the mid-tier came along, it was just like a happy birthday to me sort of thing. You know, I could grow more species and choose the cover crop seed because I've got the money to spend. So it was a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. And Simon, are you doing, I know you're struggling with connection a little bit, but how are you doing your cover crops or getting the seed for that? Do you home save?
Sorry, you're asking me?
So how do you get your cover crop seed?
Yeah, I don't grow cover crops at all.
With that, what we're doing at home, we obviously buy some in, we buy straights in, we try and mix them, we take as much out of the barn as possible. So it's a mix, but trying to keep that cost down sort of does have to be factored in. But yeah, it's a hard cycle to sort of break away from, and thinking more is better, and it always comes down to the pounds, shillings and pence. But in Tim's system, where you're reducing everything, you're reducing the nitrogen, you're reducing everything, but your biology is then going in the right direction, he's now seeing that benefit. And so it's that very much that hamster wheel, which you keep running and you keep running and you keep running, and then nature will throw you off the side and you'll end up in a heap if you get it wrong, and then you usually trying to get back on. But it's just having that mindset change now is to sort of look at a different scenario. And I'd say that cover cropping is something that is going to come, and under the guidance from the government and under ELMS and things like that, potentially it will be sort of a very big subject that we've really got to learn very quickly. So I would say trying to keep the cost down is one thing, but we need to learn very quickly, and we're only going to learn by actually trying it.
I think that the other beautiful thing about cover crops as well is the one thing I've learned, that Neil Fuller does a really good presentation on it, but if you go over a 100-year period, everybody's talking about planting trees, but if you do it over a 100-year period, the cover crops sequence just as much carbon as a tree does. But the beauty of growing the cover crop is we can still produce food. And that's ultimately what we're all here for, is to produce food and stopping business. And that's where I think cover crops come into their own, is the fact we can sequence the carbon, we can increase the wildlife, but we're also more profitable, and we're also producing food for the people that need it.
Absolutely, and nutritional value of food is going to be key as it goes forward as well. And you would hope, you know, with this style of farming, that the nutritional value and what you produce in this type of scenario can be displayed, and, you know, try and reflect a bit of value, which would take you out of the worry part. You know, I know we're getting political now, but it's probably a good time to end before we start that anyway. But, you know, you hope that that would mitigate the imports from the USA. If we do have food scanners available to us, we would then know what we're eating, and you can detail that to the diet that you prefer, would be where I would suggest it. So I'm getting quite a bit of in my earpiece here that we're going to have to tie this up. So I'd like to thank you guys very much for this evening. We could have gone on for hours of this, and we just started into politics, which is a whole other session, which I'm sure we can get started on at some point. So we'll point out that we do have the handouts on this side down the bottom there. So this will bring you up to speed with what Brian's been doing on his farm, and what Rob's been doing on his farm. And watch this space for what David and his team are going to get up to on the strategic farm in Scotland. His guys are very well down the route of doing trials, so there's a lot going to be coming out of that. So we'll move on now. So there's a lot coming on throughout the rest of the week here. So do watch the strategic farm research videos, and please watch the Scotland one. What an effort went into that. Tomorrow we've got the Strategic Farm Week podcast coming up with Paul Temple, and he was speaking with our strategic farmers. So that is going to be a cracking podcast tomorrow. And then on Thursday, we've got another 3 sessions, which I'm doing the middle one. I promise we'll stick to time on that one, don't worry. So there's another 6 basis points for you guys on that one as well. And then on Friday, Martin Grantley Smith, our cereals and oilseeds strategy director, will sum up the week and close. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed the session. And yeah, just to remind you, this has been recorded and it will go out on YouTube as soon as Christian can get it streamed up there. Okay, so we'll feel free to get in touch with any of us. My email address is there. Obviously, I'm up in Scotland, but I can certainly point you in the right direction to the rest of the team. And thank you once again to everyone for taking part. And yeah, we're before 9 o'clock, so that's a bonus. Okay. Good evening.